and welcome to this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hennig. Coming up in this week's edition of the podcast, we're getting into the situation with Le'Veon Bell, the Steelers, and the franchise tag, along with the latest news and information on DC's Wonder Woman 2 movie and Marvel's Avengers Infinity War coming out, along with Are the Vegas Golden Knights the best story in sports, Anthony Davis, Supergirl, and more coming up on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz podcast. Topic number one, our six-pack of topics on the Mutant Blitz podcast. So Le'Veon Bell, most people expected, is a no-show for Steelers offseason program, as both sides appear to be nowhere close to coming to any sort of common ground on a new contract. This will be the second straight year Le'Veon Bell has had the franchise tag placed on him. The Steelers have to be very smart about their money because they know they can't just give Le'Veon Bell all the money and more that he wants, especially when you already have Antonio Brown on your team. You got to pay the offensive line. You're trying to rebuild a defense without your star player, Ryan Shazier, who may never play football ever again. There's a lot that goes into this decision from the Steelers side. Realistically, Le'Veon Bell is being very unreasonable in these contract negotiations. I'm all for guys getting the most amount of money in the best possible deal. But what Le'Veon Bell is demanding that he be paid like a number one running back and a number two receiver. His argument is that he is the number two receiver on the Steelers. And while statistically, yes, he is the second most important receiver on the team, there's a history of players who were never paid for two positions. You know, whether it is guys like Marshall Faulk and LaDainian Tomlinson, who were better receivers than Le'Veon Bell is, whether it's a guy like Barry Sanders, who is more elusive than Le'Veon Bell is. Le'Veon Bell is asking to do something that has never been done before. In a similar vein to Odell Beckham Jr. wanting to be paid like the highest paid player in the NFL, you have Bell and Beckham, two players who are young and irrational, making demands. I don't know if this is the agents talking in their ear. I don't know if this is somebody of theirs telling them to say and think this stuff, but it's absolutely irrational and stupid. Everybody wants to get paid, but nobody cares how they get paid, what happens to the rest of the team. People think that money grows on trees just because the NFL is a multi-billion-dollar business. But the teams have to work under a salary cap. These players should get paid. I absolutely agree with that. You saw Jarvis Landry just get huge money from the Cleveland Browns. We saw in the last couple off seasons guys like Matthew Stafford and Derek Carr get big contracts as quarterbacks. Jimmy Garoppolo this off season. This is really what the problem is in this league. It's not the players getting paid. It's the players being irrational in their negotiations. Le'Veon Bell should be paid as, if not the best, one of the best running backs in the game. But he's asking for more than that. The problem with the franchise tag is that it only delays the inevitable. The inevitable that the player and the team are not going to get what they want. The team is always going to be willing to overpay you for 1 year instead of commit to you for a long time. Whereas the player is always going to want a long-term contract. This year-to-year deal is not doing the teams any good. It's not doing the players any good. Because obviously the players don't want just guaranteed money for 1 year. And the teams are not interested in giving out long-term deals. You got to find a middle ground. And as for Le'Veon Bell, he's just being irrational. Whatever number has been whispered into his ear is the wrong number. The number that should be whispered into Le'Veon Bell's ear is this: 5. Most elite running backs in today's game only last an average of 5 years at the level of play. There are obviously exceptions to the rule, whether it's LaDainian Tomlinson or Frank Gore, Curtis Martin years ago. There are groups of running backs who have lasted longer than about 5 years. But the majority of them don't have a long-term shelf life. Le'Veon Bell needs to realize that it's not about the amount of money you're going to get paid. It's about your shelf life. If you would really threaten to retire because you're not getting paid enough money, your priorities are wrong. If you're an NFL player, you need to maximize your career as much as possible financially, because this is life-changing money. This is money that changes your life, your family's life, your kids' life, everyone you know's life forever. When you're done playing, if you put aside your money properly and you're smart with your finances, you can live off this money the rest of your life. Le'Veon Bell is being a little about millions of dollars when there are people out there who can't even scrape together enough pennies to go to McDonald's and buy themselves a burger because they blew all their money putting gas in their car so they can go to and from work. As far as I'm concerned, any of these players who complain about money, they don't see the big picture. You got to maximize what you got. Stop complaining that you're not being paid at a certain tier level and just get your money and go. Get the most amount of guaranteed money you can get from the team. Le'Veon Bell is being a child, and he needs to grow up. He needs to understand the Steelers can't give him all the money on the salary cap. They still got to play other players. When Ben Roethlisberger retires, they're going to have to bring in another quarterback. Offensive line is going to have to be restructured at some point. These guys are going to get old. The defense is not as good as it should have been the last couple of years. They got to spend money over there as well. You cannot invest all your money in one position in the NFL. And if the NFL players are really that concerned about being paid more money, then the next collective bargaining agreement, they need to find a way to raise the salary cap much higher than it is. And then maybe we can have a conversation about being paid more. Until then, Le'Veon Bell needs to stop bickering about millions and start focusing on maximizing his career. Le'Veon Bell forgets that he's playing the most disposable position in the NFL. There are tons of running backs drafted every year who will come out of nowhere and have great seasons. Kareem Hunt and Jordan Howard are two perfect examples of guys who were not drafted in the first or second round and who became explosive players at the league level. Even the Eagles' Corey Clement was undrafted. Big game in the Super Bowl. Integral part of the team now. Le'Veon Bell acts like he is so much better than everybody else. Like he's so indisposable. But he's not. He's just another talented running back. Topic number 2 on the 6-pack on this week's Mutant Blitz podcast. Lynda Carter, she had the iconic role in the 1970s, playing the role of Wonder Woman on television. In an interview with Megyn Kelly on NBC, Lynda Carter has suggested that there's a tentative talks for a role in the new Wonder Woman 2 movie. And I really hope this does happen because it'd be very cool. It'd be a very nifty way of just kind of, crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's for a woman who in many ways changed not just how people viewed female superheroes, but changed how women were viewed on television altogether. The 1970s were a very interesting era in terms of how people viewed women, how women were portrayed on television, and you look at just her physique in general when it came to that television show. While she looked like the Wonder Woman of the comics, she didn't look like the average woman on television. And even though the show was successful, it was almost surprising the show was successful because of the fact that she did not fit the stereotype of the 70s television actress. So now she gets the opportunity to kind of complete the circle. The first Wonder Woman was great. Gal Gadot did an amazing job. Patty Jenkins was an amazing job doing that movie. And it looks like the second movie is going to be taking place in the 1980s during the Cold War. So basically you're going to have Wonder Woman versus the Soviet Union. Again, another fun plot device for DC to keep building their universe. In some ways, Wonder Woman is to DC Comics what Captain America is to Marvel, and the fact that you have a character who has been around for a long time, came from a different world altogether. Now, of course, with Diana. Part of it is because she's lived through all these eras. She's over 100 lifetimes at this point, compared to most of the other superheroes. Obviously, the difference is Captain America, he was frozen in a block of ice for about 50, 70 years. It's a little different, but it allows DC to keep formulating their universe. I think that's a great idea. They're going to put it in the 1980s. The villain is going to be another classic DC Comics character, the villain Cheetah. And that will be played by Kristen Wiig. So I think there's going to be a lot of promise for this movie. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they portray Wonder Woman in the 1980s. Also, having a 70-year gap between the first and second Wonder Woman movies, how are you going to explain what Wonder Woman has been doing since the end of World War I to the Cold War? That's a lot of time to cover. It's a lot of time to make up for and explain. And whatever role Lynda Carter has in it will be cool, but I like the fact that they are in talks to include her. I think it would be a lot of fun for a lot of older fans of the Wonder Woman character to see her on the big screen in that movie, in whatever role she would be in. And definitely a tip of the cap to DC if they can make it happen. You do sometimes got to pay homage to the people that came before you, just like The Flash did with the actor who plays Jay Garrick being from the original Flash TV show in the 1990s, and now he's on the modern Flash show. You got to appreciate when they acknowledge the people who came before. Topic number 3 on the 6-pack of topics on the Mutant Blitz podcast. So the Pelicans right now, as of recording this on Wednesday night, have a 2-0 lead over the Blazers in the 2018 NBA playoffs. First of all, it's an amazing job of the Pelicans to stay in the postseason race, despite losing Boogie Cousins for the season, and Cousins was having a great season himself. Anthony Davis again showing you why he should be an MVP candidate, averaging 28.5 points per game in the series, and he's getting help from Drew Holiday, the former Sixers draft pick, former UCLA guard, 27 points per game in the series. And they go back to New Orleans now. They sweep both games from the Trailblazers. So guess what? Portland, no more home court advantage. And I really love this story because, to me, Anthony Davis, we always talk about how talented he is, how amazing he is, but now he's finally gets a chance to shine on the biggest stage and show you that he doesn't just deserve to be in the MVP conversation. I would argue he should be the MVP. I know a lot of people are apprehensive to give it LeBron for various reasons. People feel like LeBron gets too much recognition, that LeBron could be the MVP every year. I get all that. But Anthony Davis deserves this award way more than a James Harden. He has better numbers than James Harden since Boogie Cousins got injured. He's shooting better than Harden. He's playing overall better game offensively and defensively than Harden. You could argue that Anthony Davis is just a better basketball player than James Harden. It's a shame he plays in New Orleans, because if he played in somewhere like New York with the Knicks, or Philadelphia with the Sixers, or LA with the Lakers or the Clippers, he'd be getting way more recognition. But because he plays in New Orleans, he's kind of second fiddle. And in this series, you're seeing how dominant of a force of nature he is offensively and defensively. It's a shame for the Blazers. I really like the Blazers tandem of Lillard and McCollum, but they just haven't had a good last couple games. Portland is always going to be a player away. The way that roster is built, it's not built to fully accommodate Lillard and McCollum's skill set. So if they lose this series, on one hand, yes, it'd be disappointing. But on the other hand, I would be very excited, because getting Anthony Davis to the next round of the playoffs would be absolutely bonkers to watch, because that would mean it would probably be the Pelicans versus the Warriors. Again, if the Pelicans win out and if everything goes chalk otherwise, Pelicans and Warriors, Steph Curry returns for the second round. How are they going to stop Anthony Davis? Are they going to put Kevin Durant on him? Is it going to be Draymond Green? He provides so many matchup nightmares. And you look at a guy like Drew Holiday having a great series. the NBA is about matchups. I felt that New Orleans was going to give Portland problems because of Anthony Davis and because he has a better supporting cast people give him credit for. I didn't think the Pelicans would actually win the series. Now I'm practically cheering for it because I want to see Anthony Davis make it to the second round. I want to see him get more national attention. The dude is arguably one of the 10 best players in the league, and he's getting the chance to show it against a very good Blazers team as they head back to New Orleans with a 2-0 series lead. If they win this series in 5 games, if you're Portland, you got to have some conversations about your roster, about everything, because you get into this position to have home court advantage and you squander it. It's really bad. And you know what? I think the Portland then would have to consider what are they going to do with Lillard and McCollum moving forward, because obviously as that team is built now, listen, they should be able to beat the Pelicans. It's not like the supporting cast around Anthony Davis is not elite. And as I said earlier, if you thought Anthony Davis shouldn't be MVP and James Harden should be MVP up to this point, I know it's a regular season award, but just looking at what Davis has done in these 2 playoff games should prove to you that he is the most valuable player in the league. If you're not going to give it to LeBron, you got to give it to Anthony Davis. Topic number 4 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz podcast. So, Avengers Infinity War, it's coming. It's going to be here sooner than you know. And with every trailer, TV spot, behind the scenes clip, we get more and more bits and pieces of information ahead of April 27th. Thanos is going to be the ultimate Marvel Cinematic Universe villain. And the Russo brothers say that they want Thanos to be to the Marvel Cinematic Universe what Darth Vader was to Star Wars, which is the preeminent villain, the villain that every villain is ever compared to. And I think that's fascinating because it's amazing how these characters and these storylines have evolved. You know, when Thanos first made his cameo appearance during the end credits of the first Avengers movie, I think people understood that Marvel was going big or going home. You know, when you got to the point where you said, all right, Iron Man's been successful. We're going to bring in Captain America. We're going to bring in Thor. We're going to bring in the Hulk. We're going to build this Avengers team. You knew Loki was going to be a formidable opponent. But then you said, we're going to build for something even bigger. We're going to build it for something even better. And it's becoming more and more apparent that the idea with Thanos, he's more than just the Darth Vader to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That he has been pulling the strings on everything that has happened in all the Marvel movies. Thanos has been a puppet master influencing everyone from Red Skull in the first Captain America movie to Loki giving him the staff with the Mind Stone in it and the Tesseract to use in the first Avengers movie, to influencing Ultron in the second Avengers movie, to giving Ronan the Power Stone in the first Guardians movie. It's becoming more and more evident that Thanos had his hands in every single major villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Thanos is the most powerful villain, arguably, in all of Marvel Comics. And the way to beat him is you have to have somebody have the power of a cosmic level entity. Now, in Marvel Comics, a cosmic level entity is there are people whose power and abilities transcend normal abilities. Like when you saw in the second Guardians of the Galaxy movie, Ego has ridiculous amount of power, especially on his own planet. You saw, for example, a character like Ronan with the Power Stone. That just gives you an idea of what Thanos is capable of, and multiply that. Because he's going to get multiple Infinity Stones by the end of this movie, and which is going to cause the death of characters. I've been saying for a while now that I think Steve Rogers is going to be one of the casualties. I gave that explanation last week because of the Russos' revelations of certain things on social media. I think there may be a potential possibility that Robert Downey Jr.'s character may be taken out as well. You know, Robert Downey Jr. has been hinting online about this is what we've all been waiting for. And there's been a lot of insinuation that it may be more than one person who dies in this movie. So for Thanos to really reach that preeminent villain level, he does have to kill a couple of our heroes. And I think that that's what's going to be fascinating, is how Marvel moves on from this preeminent villain doing these really bad things, which is going to open the door for Avengers 4. It's going to open the door for a lot of other theories. And I don't want to get into too much conjecture here, but I just want to emphasize that I like this idea of this intense sociopath who takes no prisoners kind of villain that the Russo brothers are trying to make with Thanos. And I as a comic book reader, I really appreciate it. And I think that this movie, if you enjoyed other Marvel movies, any of them, this movie is probably going to eclipse anything that you have ever seen before from a Marvel movie. Topic number 5 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz podcast. So the Vegas Golden Knights, they sweep the LA Kings. Goodbye, Drew Doughty. Goodbye, Jeff Carter. Goodbye, Jonathan Quick. Goodbye, Andre Kopitar. We don't care that you have Stanley Cup experience. We, the Vegas Golden Knights, are just going to kick you out of the first round of the NHL playoffs. I mean, this franchise has done amazing things throughout the season. I mean, they've broken every inaugural season record for an expansion franchise. And you got to give a lot of credit to how the team was built. You got to give a lot of credit to the fact that when they went through this expansion draft, they did it in a way that was going to make this team as competitive as possible. And I've heard it suggested on NHL Network and on ESPN SportsCenter late night that the Vegas Golden Knights are the greatest story in sports history. I'm not going to sit here and buy that. And here's why. They're not exactly an underdog. This isn't the Miracle on Ice U.S. hockey team going against the Russians. This isn't Buster Douglas knocking out Mike Tyson. The Vegas Golden Knights were built to be competitive. Unlike teams like the Atlanta Thrashers when they became an expansion franchise, or the Florida Panthers when they became an expansion franchise, the Golden Knights had an opportunity to load up their team with proven stars. Guys like William Karlsson, guys like James Neal, a Stanley Cup winning goaltender in Marc-Andre Fleury. It's not like they loaded up their team with a bunch of nobodies. And even guys who aren't the superstar level players, a veteran defenseman like Derek Eklund, a great locker room guy like Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. They have a roster full of guys who already had NHL experience, guys who knew what it took to be successful in the NHL. It's a great story, don't get me wrong, and I appreciate the story. I think it's spectacular. It's a lot of fun to watch this team basically take the NHL by storm, but we've seen plenty of NHL teams come out of nowhere and surprise people. Look, it was just the team they swept, the Los Angeles Kings. You know, we always used to joke that they're the Philadelphia Flyers West because they had Mike Richards and Jeff Carter and a few other former Flyers all on their team. And then they won the Cup as an 8 seed, storming through the Western Conference and getting to the Stanley Cup Finals. There's been plenty of examples of teams coming out of nowhere and having success in the NHL playoffs. So I think the Vegas Golden Knights may be one of the best sports stories of this year. They may be the best NHL story of the NHL 2017-18 season. But it's not like this team is a bunch of underdogs. Yeah, in some ways you could argue that they were a bunch of guys that nobody, valued enough. But I don't know if they were unwanted. I mentioned Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. He was one of the locker room leaders in Philadelphia. James Neal was a very impactful forward with 2 different playoff teams, the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Nashville Predators. You look at a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury, it's not like he was some no-name goalie who was washed up. Half the reason why he lost his job to Matt Murray is because he got Wally pipped. It was an injury. He didn't lose his job to Matt Murray because all of a sudden he couldn't play anymore. He lost his job because of an injury, and he just never was able to gain it back. So you have a Vegas team full of talented guys. We so easily forget the past when it comes to some of these guys because all we see is the roster. All we see is the team as we know it now. We don't look at the big picture of where these players came from before they got drafted by the Vegas Golden Knights. So I enjoy the story. I think it's great. But to suggest that this is the greatest story in all of sports, I think is definitely a reach. Although I'm rooting for them to make it the Stanley Cup Finals. I would love to see a scenario where the Las Vegas Golden Knights get to the Stanley Cup Finals and play the Pittsburgh Penguins with two former Penguins in James Neal and Marc-Andre Fleury, and they beat the Penguins for the Cup, and Vegas brings the Cup home in their first season. I think that would be an epic storyline. I would love to see that. I would just love to see Vegas win the Stanley Cup no matter what, because I think it would be a major snub to the rest of the NHL to say, all of you teams that have been around forever, your teams like the Maple Leafs and the Oilers, that all of you don't know what you're doing. But this team of upstarts, of guys that some of you didn't even want, guess what? This team knows better than you, and they were able to do what you couldn't. I would enjoy that storyline. I think if we did get that, I think that would probably bother a lot of people around the NHL. But I don't care. I like to upset the apple cart. I'm the guy who gets excited when an undefeated team in college football loses because it totally messes up the college football playoff rankings. I'm just that kind of guy. Topic number 6 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz podcast. I want to talk a little bit about the CW Supergirl because this was the first week that Supergirl shows were back on the air. CW is doing this weird setup now where they're basically breaking up their seasons into 3 parts and they're staggering some of their shows. I mentioned to you a few weeks ago about Black Lightning. Black Lightning right now has the second best ratings of all the CW shows. The Flash has the best ratings of all the CW shows. Now, DC Legends and Black Lightning season finales have come and gone. Those shows go away till next year. So it's interesting how they like to stagger this. I guess they don't want to do too much overkill with superheroes. Or maybe the CW is trying to maximize certain times of year for certain shows. But either way, Supergirl returned with a very interesting episode, digging more into the character Wynn's past, him meeting his mother he hasn't seen in 20 years after his father's death. The setup of an apprentice of his evil father trying to kill everybody. So while the return of Supergirl obviously is cleaning up certain aspects of the hiatus that they had for over a month, I feel like no matter what, by the end of this season, Supergirl is not going to address the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is Supergirl, now in its 3rd season, has done nothing to address the original purpose of the show. When they were promoting this show, which was originally on CBS, it wasn't on the CW, it moved to the CW after its first season, once they realized that it wasn't gaining the traction that they wanted on CBS. The original intent of the show was supposed to be a superhero show for women. It was supposed to be a female superhero for a female audience that wants a certain style of television. And while in theory that made sense, in application, the show has just become another CW drama that just happens to involve superheroes. I think Melissa Benoist has done a very good job playing Kara, the cousin of Superman, how she became Supergirl and her past and exploring all those things. I think the show overall has done a good job with the character of Supergirl, but it's all the other stuff that has just not been as good as it should be. I think that the only things that they've gotten 100% good with is Supergirl and Martian Manhunter, J'onn J'onzz. The supporting role characters, while they've done a good job with those characters and their roles and their stories, the show is still not a show for women with a female superhero. Yes, in some ways there are aspects of the show that that may have an appeal to a female audience, there's nothing about the show that screams this is the show for women, except that there's a plethora of major characters who are females. That's pretty much it. There's never a point where I've watched the show and I said, man, this show is really for women. It's not really for me to watch. Supergirl still doesn't know what they are as a show. It's interesting. It's fun. It has its moments. But of all the CW shows, if I'm to rank them in terms of substance plus story writing plus acting plus appeal to the average viewer, not just to the hardcore comic book person, I would say right now the number one show is still The Flash, not just because of the ratings, but the show is very well done. I think Arrow is still number two. I think that part of the reason why people haven't watched Arrow and kept up with it is because there's a whole group of people who didn't watch the finale of the first season and didn't go to the second season, and they didn't see the show evolve and mature over the last few years, so otherwise it would have more viewers. But it's still a very good show, and it's also the forerunner of all these other shows. I think number three right now, you have to give the tip of the cap to Black Lightning. Black Lightning, while the show does have its moments where you can tell they're still trying to find their way, the show has been very impactful in terms of really creating an interesting family dynamic. Introducing Black Lightning with his family, I think, has made the show much more appealing than if it was just some other random superhero like some of the other characters. I think that you're building it around a family environment, around a school, around a community. I think it gives the show a lot more of appeal. And then after that, I think it's a coin flip between Supergirl and DC Legends of Tomorrow. I don't think that either one of those shows has really given you the best they have to offer yet. I don't think that we have gotten the best season or the best writing or the best anything from Supergirl yet. While you could argue season 3 is better than seasons 1 and 2, I would say that the show is still not really set the foundation for a solid future. They have a solid cast, but they don't have a solid future beyond this season. Like what? Okay, so when they defeat the bad guy and everybody moves on the next year, what's the point? I'm not getting that sense of direction, that sense of what is really the next step in all of this process after season 3. I hope Supergirl can work on the writing, work on the presentation, and really find their feet, because I think that it is good to have female superheroes on television, although I don't like the roles cast for those characters. When I had Chelsea Corinne on a month ago here on the podcast, I brought up with her about the fact that, it's kind of awkward to have a bunch of women who look more like models than they do regular women in these career fields. Look, I'm not trying to disparage skinny women, but outside of Supergirl, most of the women in the show are very petite. They're very thin. They're not the average woman you see at these professions. If I was to meet a real woman in the real world who works for the FBI or the CIA or the NSA or, is a Marine or something, most of those women are not petite model looking women. They look like they go to the gym. They look like they work out. They look like, they've put in hours of work to build up their physique a little more to sustain the work that comes with the job. This idea that, Lena Luthor had to be this, this hyper attractive model looking woman, I think is ridiculous too. If you would have made her look a little bit more like a Luthor and less like a woman that everybody wants to date, I'm not saying she had to be ugly or anything like that, but it's the fact that you're taking these characters and you're making them unrealistic. Again, another reason why it's not a show made for women. It's a show made with an idea of women. And I think that's what I didn't like about the casting in that manner. But I digress. Hopefully Supergirl finds its feet by the end of the season, and I won't be shaking my head as we get to the finality of the season. But for now, it is what it is. And I think until further notice, you're still going to have 3 shows that are better than Supergirl unless they make some major strides before the end of this year or in next season. And I think the people who run Supergirl need to spend some time watching the Wonder Woman movie and the upcoming Captain Marvel movie to learn what it really means to present a strong female character and not just a character who is strong in power abilities. Thanks for listening to this week's Mutant Blitz podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, hit that like button, hit that subscribe so you can catch us each and every week here. I'm Josh Hennig. If you have any thoughts or comments on this week's podcast, drop them down below. Any thoughts on the topics, any things you maybe want to see covered in future podcasts. And catch us every week right here for the Mutant Blitz podcast. I'm Josh Hennig. Catch you next week.